that would be great. I think it'll help to clear up everybody else's screens and you can just focus on the speaker. So Jason, take it away.
All righty. Thanks, Pam. Now for the fun stuff. If I can actually get my screen to actually move. Here we go. So as Pam mentioned, the lab is one part of the Institute, and what we've been doing for a long time now is aiding companies and organizations and individuals in selecting location-specific cleaning options. So we're looking for better and safer. Also, once we find these better and safer options, we're trying to share this information on what we have found out and what works really well. So when we originally started out, we were mainly focused on looking at just the cleaning products themselves. But over time, we realized that the equipment is just as important as the chemistries. And so we've expanded what we do to include equipment for all of the fields of cleaning that we look at, which includes parts cleaning, precision cleaning, institutional cleaning, as well as household cleaning. So thankfully, most of you had said that you were aware of the health risks with cleaning products and disinfecting products. This is just kind of a quick little snapshot of some of the acute and some chronic hazards you may come across with headaches and dizziness, asthma concerns. And it's also important to note that these chemicals can affect children's health vastly differently than how they would affect someone in the workplace. So in manufacturing, you may not have to worry about children, but if you're in an office setting or a school setting, that's something you may need to be concerned with. People who are smaller, they uptake things a little bit quicker, so there's a bigger impact on these types of health effects. So this brings us to why we're here today, is to talk about how to do things safer. And we talk about safety, we talk about green cleaning. Now, green cleaning has been around for probably right around 20 years or so. Unfortunately, when they first came out, they were focused mostly on, is it safer than what you're currently using? And this led to people selecting products that didn't necessarily work great for what they were trying to do. And this created a negative image for these green products. And sadly, that still persists to some extent today. But the good news is, many of these green cleaners that are on the market now, they've been improved. They're either equal to or greater than in performance than these traditional solvents and cleaning chemistries. But we always want to make sure that people understand, just because it's safer and shown by the manufacturer to be effective, you still need to make sure it works for you. Now, you want to do this so that you don't go out and buy a ton of this and then are unhappy with it, and then you have to figure out how to get rid of it and start all over. So it's good to buy in a small amount to do some evaluation internally to be able to see if it will work and do what you need it to do. This is where we can come in and we can help. We've done extensive work in the laboratory identifying how to best show these products how well they work and how they compare to what you may be currently using. And we've also included work in the field because we know it's important to see how it works on site versus in the lab, because it's not an exact match. And one of the things that we've been currently developing is in a way to be able to to figure out how to do this with the social distancing that we're involved with right now. So Alicia and I have come up with plans and worked with other people in the field to be able to have them walk through their own facility, record what they're doing, and share it with us, and so that we can kind of get a virtual tour of their facility and make sure what we're going to do in the lab matches what you're doing. So that's how we can make sure it's process specific and location specific. So the question is how have we gotten to this point where the greener products are now on par? A lot of that has to do with third-party certifications. It helps to verify how real these claims are and helps you to understand who you can trust. I kind of like to equate it as the used car salesman. He's going to tell you everything great about the car, but he's going to leave out the fact that it may run off the road and have flat tires in 6 months. So you want to have Carfax come in and say, well, this car has had problems with this and that. This is what these organizations can do. So what the big three that are out there is Green Seal, Safer Choice from EPA, which used to be called Design for the Environment, and then Eco Logo. So these three organizations were focused on making sure things were safer and looking at how well they worked. So how do you go about and make your change to something green? Now, what those organizations have done is they've created a list of environmental health and safety criteria that's important on the general big picture. They try to cover as many things as they can without being overly specific to eliminate everything. The next step in your process and when you're looking for green products is to take what they have and build upon that. You just, I mean, if you wanted to, you could just go with it and say it's good enough for me. But as an organization, you really want to talk about what is important for you to be looking at. Are you worried about cleaning? Are you worrying about disinfecting? Are you worried about asthma? Do you have people that are, there that need special care? It's really important to make your own list based on what's out there. Now, you can turn to other organizations to help find out what they've been doing. Like on the state level, the Massachusetts Operational Service Division has an EPP program that's really robust, and we've worked with them closely for many decades now. And they put it forth, they've done what I just described. They took Green Seal, they took Safer Choice, and they said, all right, that's our benchmark. Let's move ahead, move us further down that path to being greener. And so they've developed protocols and techniques for what they're looking for. EPA has done that as well with their program as well. You can also look to larger organizations and corporations. I put on here quickly just, universities and hospitals, but you can look at large organizations, even like a Walmart or a Home Depot or a Lowe's. They have their own plans, their own priorities that they're looking for. It's a good thing for you to look at to see if you can find it and then adapt it to what your situation is looking for. There's also many nonprofit organizations that are out there that can help you to identify this type of scenario or criteria that you're looking for.
Thanks, Jason. I just want to intersperse that Julia Wolf, who's here with the Environmentally Preferable Products program in Massachusetts, has shared another link to the Eco Logo information on the chat box. So go ahead and look at that. Go ahead.
Yep. So, as I had mentioned, we're talking about how you go about making sure things are safer. The main thing that I hope you get out of this today is that there are different levels of preparing your facility that you can follow. And unfortunately, a lot of these terms you see on the screen right now get interchanged and not necessarily being used correctly. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of take a second or so just to talk about what these are. As you can see, they're quite basic in the definition, but it's very effective to realize that they're not the same thing. So with cleaning, it's a product that's designed to remove the soil, the unwanted stuff from the surface. Now, you notice there I said remove. It doesn't necessarily kill anything, but you can still remove the organisms in a level that's somewhat safe. You can get up to 99.9% of the microorganisms can be removed when you use a cleaner and a wipe when you wipe the surface. In some terms, that's called a 2 to 3 log reduction. That's, as you can see, the number of 9s you have. It's a lot easier to say a 2 log reduction versus going 99 or 99.9999. So it just gives you an idea of what level you can achieve by wiping a surface with a cleaning product and a wipe. Now, problem is that you may wipe that surface, remove that amount of debris and bacteria from the surface, but guess what? You go to the next surface and wipe it, you just put all that back onto the surface somewhere else. So the next step, next level of removal of these organisms would be sanitizing. This is done after cleaning, and it kills any of the organisms on the surface that it can get to. It reduces the contamination level to where health may not be affected. It doesn't evaporate and doesn't leave behind any kind of residue. And it can achieve a 3 to 5 log reduction of these microorganisms. It cannot claim killing a virus or a fungi. So that's important to realize here with the SARS-CoV-2, because that is a virus. It is not a bacteria. So this is one of those things. If you're using a sanitizer and you're thinking you're doing your disinfection, it's not the same thing. Which brings us to the next term, is disinfecting. So this goes further than sanitizing, where it can kill a lot more than just bacteria. It's looking at bacteria and viruses, but it can't necessarily kill off their spores. So it can't eliminate it completely. It does leave behind a barrier or some kind of film on the surface, which helps to prolong the effectiveness of this disinfecting material. It can retrieve at least a 99.99%. You can see how this gets challenging when you get all those nines in there. So it's a 4 log reduction. And the last one, you normally would see in like a hospital setting or somewhere you need to make sure everything is removed, is sterilization. This will eliminate just about everything. You have a 6 log reduction. So that's going from 1 million organisms down to 1. So that's kind of the magnitude of how this works. And as I had mentioned before, I hope this is the message you come away with this, is that you cannot disinfect a dirty surface. You're sitting there scratching your head going, why can't I unmute myself and say, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, there we go. So what happens is the soil and the dirt on the surface makes it less effective for this disinfectant by providing a place for the microbes to be sheltered from direct contact with the disinfectant. If the disinfectant can't get to the microbe, it can't kill it. The soils can also absorb the active ingredients, and it can also disrupt the active ingredients in the disinfectant to make it change what it is and not do what it is supposed to do. So what do you need to do? Clean first. So all the dirt, debris, and gunk and goo needs to be removed so that the disinfectant can contact and destroy the microbes directly. You need to get in there and get onto the surface. So some of you may be asking this question, but I can go to the store and I can buy a cleaning product that says all-purpose cleaner and disinfectant. Well, if you've paid attention, you can learn that, yeah, it could do work, but you'd have to do what first? You'd have to clean that surface to remove everything that's in the way of the microorganisms. Then you'd have to go back again a second time and apply this and allow it to follow the directions and make sure it is killing off the bacteria. So even though it says it's all in one, they're not saying you can do it all at the same time. So you have to make sure to follow the labels. They will say clean and then do a disinfecting thing, the disinfecting step. The important thing is to say, well, why don't I just do that? Save myself some time and some money. Well, it's important to remember that these disinfectants are not cleaners. They're pesticides. That means that they're designed to be nasty and remove and kill things from the surface. So if you're using it as a general purpose cleaner, first, you're exposing yourself as well as others in the area to a level of chemicals they don't need to be exposed to.
Jason, can I interrupt for a real
Sure.
quick second? So Lynn Rose just shared that she said that the NPIC, I don't know who that is, hopefully you do, says that disinfectants cannot make claims for residual effects. And so she's wondering if you're inferring that by leaving a film behind, that it might have a residual effect?
Well, my understanding of the disinfectants is that they don't usually come with a rinse requirement, so they will leave something behind it. I agree with Lynn that it may not necessarily be killing off things, but it's there on the surface. It's something to be aware of. Thanks, Lynn. So if they're not cleaners and they're designed to do one thing, you might have to make sure you know when you want to be able to use them. Meaning, do you have to when do you clean it? Is it every day? Is it all the time? Is it once in a while? Is it only when someone's sick? What concentration do you need to use it at? What does the label tell you to do? What do you need to make sure you make other people aware of? How often and the frequency of the disinfection you have to be able to follow. It also is important to use the right product for the organism that you're trying to reduce. That means some of these products, when they're registered by EPA, they have to submit testing to show that their product was evaluated in a laboratory setting under these conditions to kill this type of organisms. So if you're looking to kill the SARS-CoV-2, and this product hasn't been tested for human coronavirus, you're probably not going to want to use it on that type of organism. So it's important to look at what it's been tested for. So the best way to make sure that you're doing things correctly is, write it down, have a procedure, and also ensures that you're doing it the same way every time. The questions you want to ask yourself while you're doing this is, why are you doing it in the first place? Is it a requirement by the state? Are you required to do it so you can open your doors to get back in there? I mean, if you're disinfecting certain areas, do they need to be disinfected if no one's ever going to come in contact with that area? What are the materials made out of? I mean, the surface, is it soft? Is it porous like a fabric, or is it a non-porous like a floor or a wall or a kitchen counter? When do you do all this type of cleaning? And our favorite thing to ask is, are you using the least toxic and most effective product you can be using for this? And that's the message that we're trying to help you guys identify, is finding those safer ones. And another question to ask your group is, who should be doing this cleaning? If there's someone who has some health issues, is it, should they be the one in charge of doing the cleaning or the disinfecting? Are they going to be exposed to something that they shouldn't be? And if they are, what kind of personal protection equipment are they going to be using? Are there other people outside of the cleaning crew that's going to be exposed to this? The occupants of the building or the room or the office? What do you do with your chemicals when you're not using them, and how are you going to be getting rid of them when you're done? All things that need to go into this procedure, the planning.
Jason?
Yep.
Couple questions about bleach in particular, and I know that you're going to get into that a little bit later. One question is just your thoughts on bleach as a disinfectant, and I think you'll probably get to that. The other question.
Yep, we'll come back to that one.
Okay, and then the other question is about dilution, and Dorothy Wigmore shares that a baby got burns from sitting in a grocery cart in a grocery store in their province, and she's assuming that's because they used bleach or something like that without dilution. So what dilution do you recommend?
We'll come back around to that. Well,
okay.
I'm almost there. Be patient.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So again, why would you disinfect? You want to identify the high risk and high touch areas. I gave you some examples there. You also want to make sure what's going to come in contact with it. So, skin or mucous membranes is important to be aware of. And you also want to adjust your procedures for, is it, the daily maintenance of a facility, or did somebody get sick and you need to make sure that you're handling possible contamination and spread of this. So like I had mentioned, the type of organisms that you're trying to kill is important. Now, the N list that's out there that everyone is referring to is not the only source of products that can be used safely for the human coronavirus removal. That list is vendors submitting to EPA their documentation saying our product has been able to do this, we've shown they can do that. They review it and then they add them to the list. EPA on their site does say to use the EPA registration number to go onto their site to verify something that may not be on the N list to see if it can be used for the human coronavirus. So you also, like I mentioned, surfaces to be disinfected. You want to be careful of cross-contamination going from one place to the next, and also, is it dirty before you disinfect? Those are all things we talked about. Concentration, for bleach, I know that there's varying levels that you can use depending on what you're trying to remove, but I know in a laboratory setting, in a microbiology lab, they use like a 10% dilution, 9 to 10% dilution of bleach for that type of disinfectant capabilities. That may change depending on where you are and what you're dealing with. In the case of the baby that may have been exposed, that was my initial thought, was they probably used bleach at its straight up concentration, and then at that level, it's going to be very caustic to the skin. That would be my guess as to what has happened. Contact time is important to make sure. When you read the labels, it tells you how to use the product, the concentrations. You want to document this. How long does it have to sit on the surface and be appropriate to kill off the bacteria? You're also looking at how long have you had this product? How long can it last before it's no longer usable? I have a bottle of bleach in my laundry room that's probably 15 years old. I probably ought to get rid of it because it's not going to do much of anything. So it's one of those things you have to make sure, just because you have it, it may not necessarily be still potent. So the key elements, you want to look at what's out there for your requirements from your facility. either your company or your school or your library or your daycare. You want to look at county and state and federal requirements that you need to do. Like right now with the state reopening, those are things that you need to look through and see what they're telling you need to do. And Alicia will get to some of that later. Yeah, she's nodding yes, so I didn't put her under the bus, so we're good. So again, we talked about the cleaning procedures, how you make up these dilutions, how you clean, how long you clean for, what are you using, who are you, and then you're communicating what you're doing, telling not only the people that are working on it, but also people in the facility, as well as the people who own the building and other people who may be in the building who are, if you're in a co-populated building with industry and residential, you have to make sure that they know what's going on as well. Training is important as well. You have to make sure everybody that's working with these things know what they're doing and how to do it. I'm gonna sidestep this one because we kind of already talked about all of this. But one thing is, I talked about the vulnerable populations in special areas. Those are the things that you really need to be concerned about. Are there people who have lower immune systems, or they're older, or they're young and they're small, they've been sick? Those are things you need to worry about. So for cleaning procedures, you want to look at what you're using, how much you're using of it. You want to limit how much you have to get rid of it when you're done. Also, can you recycle any of the materials, or is it a once and done? These are all things you need to look at when you're looking at the cleaning. For entryways, it's important to clean this because this is where everybody comes through, everybody's exposed to. One way you can help eliminate some of the source of contamination coming in is you have matting at the doorway that people can walk across. This is more for cleaning versus the disinfecting, but it's still the same idea of the entryway is an important place to focus on. For floors, you have to make sure you're looking at the flooring types. Different floor types have different requirements. You're looking at a hard floor, you could have a wood floor, you could have a tile floor, you could have marble floor, and you have carpeting, and when do you have to vacuum? These are all things that are going to change depending on what your floors are made of. Again, we've talked about disinfection, making sure that you're using something that's registered for the use that you're using it at the right concentration, and the contact times need to be followed. I kind of alluded to before, don't cross-contaminate. The biggest thing you want to be concerned of is when you're cleaning a restroom, you want to make sure you have designated materials to do this, because you don't want to take something you use to clean the bathroom and the toilet and go clean the kitchen sink. It's not the best practice. You want to make sure you have designated things for high contamination areas. And at facilities, you also want to make sure that you're thinking beyond just maybe your manufacturing setting. Everyone's in there, they have to make sure all their equipment is ready to go. You also have to think about the infrastructure. What else do you do there? Do you have meeting areas? Do you have eating areas? What are you doing with the trash? Or if you have indoor plants, how often do you have to make sure that those things are cleaned up and not providing contamination of the workplace? I keep mentioning the vulnerable people, so it's there, be aware of it. We talked about making sure that you're talking with the building owners, the managers, the occupants, the people that work there. Provide training. Make sure it's on site and it's site specific. It's nice to be able to pull a training that already exists, but if it doesn't deal with what you're doing with, you're kind of wasting your time. So it's important that you're tailoring it to your specific needs. And one of the things that we have found in all the work that we've always done, and this is kind of a no-brainer, is that make sure you include the employees who are going to be doing this work in this process. Tell them, ask them for their feedback, their input. They usually have a good idea of what works and what doesn't work and why they wouldn't do it that way. Even though it says, this is the best practice, they're going to say, yeah, we're never going to do that because, and they give you a whole long list of things. It's important that they feel like they're part of the process and not just being told what to do. It's important to have safety data sheets available as well. That way they know what you're using and how to use them. I had mentioned training. It's not just for the new people that you're hiring to do this. It's the people who've been there for a while, and they should have continual education and training on what's new, what's good. It should also include the upper supervisors and management so that they know what's going on and that they can feel like they know what their workers are doing and what they should be providing to them. So it shouldn't happen in a vacuum. They should all be getting some form of training. And we all know that finding something right now is very challenging. There's a lot of misinformation or lack of information on specific viruses. The best way you can do this is make sure you read the labels, look for the safer ingredients. You want to check for the appropriate times and how to use it. And I mentioned using the EPA registration number. That's the best way to find out if it will be useful on the virus that we're looking at. So as I mentioned, the N list, what I had done is I went through the list of 420 so odd products that are on there and said, well, how can I convey this in one slide? Well, the font of 0.3 didn't work. So I decided that I'd pull out all of the active ingredients for the various products that are on there. And the way that they're listed from here to this way is that this is anecdotal versus actually counting them all, but this is in the order of how many times I saw these ingredients on the list. So the top of the list was the quat-based disinfectants. And the ones that are in green below that were also in there listed as an active ingredient for a particular product. So there were some that had glutaraldehyde and sodium carbonate, and things like that. So you can see there's a whole long list of things you can choose from on there. Not all of them are created equal. Not all of them will be the best fit for your situation. Some of them may have too many health effects associated with it. I know some people at the beginning had said that they're just concerned about getting rid of this virus and moving on, which is great as long as you're doing things safely and effectively with the health effects that may be associated with any of the chemicals that you're looking at. So this is just to give you an idea. When you get there, they've tried to improve how I think every other day they have a new search window how you can find these alternatives. I think the most recent one is they're allowing you to search by the registration number or the active ingredient. They also have on there some other things as well as keyword searching. So if you have a particular product, try all the different ways you can think of to see if it's on that list. I would start with the name and look at active ingredients and then the EPA registration number. The website to get to there is up on the top of the page as well. So I mentioned, the active ingredients and some of the safety concerns. The one on the left, the one that says avoid, that's kind of self-explanatory. There are a lot of health issues associated with these, and I could spend another hour and a half talking about all those. And even that with my talking as fast as I can, I don't think I can cover them all. But there are a preferred subset of that. And this is something that Julia Wolf and the Toxics Reduction Task Force have worked on closely for the past several years to come up with what we thought would be a good list of safer alternatives for disinfecting. So we have a various amount of criteria that we all kind of put together and came up with. I think someone is not on. So that's just a short list of what's there and what we had thought would be a good alternatives to people to look for. So back to that question about bleach. I told you I'd come back. Here we are. So there are two main things that with bleach solutions, sodium hypochlorite is your traditional bleach. Like we've said all along, there are a lot of health issues and risks associated with it. But there are some benefits to it. It lasts a while on a shelf, maybe not the 15 years like my bottle, but you can sell it in the store, you can buy it, you can keep it in there and you'll have it on stock. It's inexpensive. Some of the other issues with the skin contact, it does have a high pH and can cause some issues, especially if you're a little baby. So another element of using chlorine as a type of disinfectant is sodium hypochlorite and hypochlorous acid are related. And depending on the pH of a solution, you can have either or both of these solutions or these chemicals in your cleaning or disinfecting solution. So for hypochlorous acid, it's a lot safer, maybe not a lot safer, but it definitely is on the safer spectrum for the exposure to free available chlorine. It's commonly used in wounds and eye care, so you can see that it may not necessarily have as many health effects as with skin exposure and eye irritation. Its downfall is it doesn't usually last that long in a solution. You're lucky if you can make something that's 2 to 3 weeks. you can see that that would be hard to find something on the shelf, buy it, bring it home, and use it before you had to get rid of it. It can be, and more often than not, it is more effective than sodium hypochlorite as a disinfectant. And as I said, it has a moderate pH. Usually hypochlorous will be the predominant chemistry in the solution at that pH range that's listed there. I did have a nice pretty chart, but you know, in the interest of time, I won't have that up on the screen, but it slides back and forth. But it's a good place. A lot of you may have seen these electrolyzed water systems. They've come up with a way to be able to create hypochlorous acid on demand so that 2 weeks isn't an issue. So you need it today, you make it today, and you use it up. And if you need it again tomorrow, you can make a new batch the next day. So you're only using what you need when you need it. Now,
Jason,
yes.
really quickly, one question is, can you share the framework used to determine the agents to avoid versus those that are preferred? What are your concerns with quaternary ammonia compounds?
That's probably something best to send out in an email, because I don't have that in front of me right now. And if Julia has it handy, you know, she could share that, but I don't have it with me right now.
Okay, all right, so we'll get back to you all on that.
Yeah, so the short list would be, you know, we're looking at acute and chronic exposures. We looked at how effective it was on multiple organisms, the contact times being lower than like 10 minutes. We were looking at some of the other health effects, you know, cancer causing and things like that. But again, it was the starting point of what safer chemistries were from Green Seal and Safer Choice. We had developed it more specifically for Massachusetts end uses, but that's definitely something that we can pull up and make available on the TURI site, as well as pointing them to the Julia's page on OSD. Great,
thanks, Jason.
Yep. So other resources that you can reach out to, we talked about COVID-19, the end list, and they talked about using the registration numbers. On TURI.org, there is right at the top of the page is a link to more COVID-19 information. The Cleaner Solutions website is more for the cleaning side of things. So if you're looking for safer cleaners to get the soil and dirt removed, that's an area that we have done a lot of work with, and the information is available in this searchable database. Some of the trade associations that you may want to look at to help develop, if you have to come up with a management system or a training package, these groups right here do a really good job of training and providing that information. The ISSA provides their SIMS training, and I've done talks on that as well. It's just basically how you go about setting up what we were just talking about. And the CMM magazine is, you know, a good resource for daily updates on different cleaning and various things related to disinfection and cleaning and chemistry and safety and best practices and new practices and all that stuff like that. I believe that's it.
That's great. So there are a lot of questions and comments that have come up in the chat room, and Alicia has been doing a great job of staying on top of that, and we've got some back and forth going. In the because we're running a little behind, I'd like to just go ahead and introduce Alicia. Jason, if you could stop sharing your screen, and Alicia, you can share yours. Alicia, as I said, has also graduated from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. She worked with us at TURI and with Jason in the lab, and even so, she still decided she wanted to work with us. And we're very glad that you made that decision, Alicia,
Thanks.
And I know Jason is as well. So thank you, and without further ado, Alicia, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Pam said, my name's Alicia. So today I'm going to be focusing more on the process of reopening your facility and kind of taking what we learned from us having to reevaluate how we're reopening our lab. Because as you know, it's a lot of information. It's kind of overwhelming what's out there. So I'm going to go over really basic overview of what Massachusetts Reopening Plan overview is, the current guidance that we've kind of seen summarized up, product selection, and kind of examples of how TURI is going about preparing for reopening that you may be able to take home and kind of take those ideas and best practices. So this is actually just the outline for Massachusetts businesses reopening. So I just wanted to quickly go over this, and some of you guys who have mentioned you kind of fall into different areas, whether it be lab spaces, office spaces. I don't know if we have any restaurants in here at all, casinos and fitnesses and gyms, but these are all different areas that have different needs. And as Jason was mentioning, there are so many options for different cleaners out there and disinfectants that, you know, it's not a one size fit all. And that's what we've found with toxic use reduction as a whole anyways, when we're working with companies one-on-one, is it's not like a, here's all the resources and you can use that and not tailor it. You really need to think about your needs at your facility. But one of our coworkers, Haley Byra, who is actually in the chat now as well, found this really good graph that is showing we are seeing an increase since the quarantine of daily exposures to cleaners and disinfectants from reports through the U.S. poison centers. And so it's definitely something that we need to talk about, especially as we're moving forward and we're using more products to be able to find our needs, to be able to keep ourselves safe while continuing our daily activities. So I just wanted to kind of show this to you guys, that this is definitely something that we need to address and think about. So right now for Massachusetts, the current guidance is, as usual, when you're opening up, you should be continuing the social guidance aspects of, you know, wearing a face mask, washing your hands, social distancing, and just being vigilant about symptoms and staying home if you feel sick. But when it comes to cleaning disinfection, for those of you who are going to CDC and to OSHA, it's very broad. It's not very specific. It mostly is just saying, hey, clean and disinfect sites regularly, you know, after shift, more frequently if you can, keeping a cleaning log. And they're recommending, for those of you who are asking what you should put into there, date, time, and scope of cleaning. So mentioning what areas that you hit. But for some of you guys in different businesses, that may not always be feasible on the fly. So having to think about training and how to incorporate that into your daily routine. But I actually think, and one thing that I'll hope to share with you guys later on, we have no problem sharing our protocols and what we've come up with, but I don't mind sharing our cleaning and disinfection log of what it looks like, because when people think of cleaning and disinfection, sometimes they group it up into one whole activity. And I think the log itself, especially to reinforce the fact that you need to separate the two things, should reflect that into your log as well. So it should be a cleaning step and then a disinfection step. And I think that will make it a lot more clear to the workers, and it will allow you to be a little bit more on top of ensuring that you're meeting those contact times, which we're going to talk about. Massachusetts is also saying, you know, disinfect high touch surface areas. So what does that actually mean? You need to think about, like, what areas are you touching a lot of the times? You know, how often people are being there, and we'll go into that. And then also just creating a plan for if there is a positive case, what does the deep clean look like, and the disinfection, and what products do you need to use to be able to meet that criteria, to be able to ensure that people are still staying safe. So Jason already kind of went into a lot of the cleaning aspects of it, but, you know, just to reiterate again, cleaning has to be performed prior to disinfecting. Especially the products that are a cleaning and disinfectant that are a one fits all, sort of like the hair shampoo that is a, you know, two for all, you think you're getting it all done and over with. You can't do that with cleaning and disinfecting. Even if it is a dual system, like having a clean and disinfectant in one product, you need to think about creating it in a two-step process. So you still need to do that cleaning step and then that disinfection step. And then conducting cleaning daily if feasible. So think about how often you're going into your facility. You know, are you cutting down your days? Do you really actually need to clean daily, or is there a way that you can cut back on that? And then also just thinking about the frequent cleaning of high touch areas. So for us in the lab, it's bench top areas, doorknobs, drawers, cabinet handles, faucet handles. But if you notice some of these things, like if it's just me going in there, or if it's another person, or we're able to separate, I may be able to use, you know, a cleaner and disinfectant at the end of the day that may have a longer contact time that is much safer, but no one else is going in there. So you can kind of think about that too, of what fits best for your needs. And if you're the only one touching it. But we've been trying to find ways to kind of reduce having to constantly clean doorknobs and disinfect them. So we've actually been looking at different things that are available online, such as the no-touch doorknobs and pulls. So this is really something you might want to think about, that if it's feasible in your facility, to reduce the hand contact on these areas. And maybe that becomes the last thing that you clean and disinfect at the end of the day. But they have free, if you Google like any of these no-touch doorknobs online, you can actually find some 3D printing free designs that you could print it yourself or you could buy online. So it's a good time where there's a lot of free resources, especially when it comes to 3D printing, to be able to make some of these materials that may be thinking outside the box to your normal just chemical solution to kind of reducing the exposure levels. So definitely look to see what's out there. I found these resources out just because, just looking to see what was online, seeing what the new technologies were coming out there, and just trying to see what else we could do. So that way we're not constantly having to use chemicals.
Thanks, Alicia. Really quickly, Rob makes a point that image on the left with the person using their arm, if they are sneezing into their sleeve, that really doesn't give you what you're looking for. So,
no. So, I mean, then in that case, if that's something that you are reinforcing for people to do that, maybe the foot one is the best option for you. So it's definitely not, like I said, a one size fit all, but it's definitely something you could think about for what fits your needs. Like I said, for our lab, it's going to be 2 or 3 people in there, and we're going to be wearing masks at all times. So even if we sneeze, that might be a better option, and I could just clean it and disinfect as needed. But if you are teaching your employees and you don't have that time, maybe a foot door opener is a better method for that. But these are just for door openings, but there's a lot of cool stuff out there that I highly suggest kind of seeing what people are looking at to reduce the exposure.
Thanks. Alicia, we have 10 minutes, and what I want to suggest, I don't want you to zip through things because there's a lot of great information to come. So I'm going to suggest that we stay on a little bit longer if people have questions for Q&A. So off you go.
Okay, sounds good. So some of the things that I definitely wanted to bring up with and kind of do the take-home portions of it is dwell time. So for every person out there, definitely look at what products say for dwell time and what is important to kill off the virus that meets your needs. So say if you're a restaurant and you're cleaning off a table for the next set of people who are coming in, you're not going to pick a disinfectant that needs a dwell time of 30 minutes or even 5 minutes. You're going to need something that's a 30-second dwell time. So you may have to do your homework and research that. And I know EPA or even the sites for the different types of products, they will actually say what dwell time is needed, or you can just ask the vendor too to be able to ensure that it works for your cleaning and disinfection process, and also keep to that dwell time. There's a reason why they have it. You can't just spray it down and wipe it immediately after, because you're inhibiting the product from actually doing what it was meant to do. So if it says on the back of the bottle that it needs a 5-minute contact time, you need to actually let it sit on the surface area before you can actually wipe. And you never want to mix or clean disinfecting chemicals. TURI has a lot of good resources about not mixing certain types of chemistries together, and there's a lot of good information out there. And sometimes it's not even just in the moment cleaning and disinfecting. You also have to think about too, when you are cleaning a surface with one product one day, there may be residue on that surface area. You can't just spray it with a different product the next day. So think about, keep consistent with what you're using and try not to mix and match what you're using at all times. And also just maintaining a clean disinfectant log. So that's what we're doing right now. And think about scheduling your workers and training of how that will fit your needs. And we already kind of went over the FAC 85 list, which is the environmental Preferable Cleaning Products Program Equipment and Supplies statewide contract. So Julia Wolf, if you have questions, she can help you on that, but that's more for municipalities and institutions. And then there's other recommended lists out there. So if you need examples of different types of cleaners and disinfectants that are safer options, TURI has kind of pulled out, like Jason showed, safer options for you to look at. I'm gonna skip to more of what we actually, oh, actually I'll go back. Also think about your budget too. We're talking about dwell times, but you also need to think about your budget as well. If you are a mom and pop shop that can't constantly keep up with purchasing over and over again a lot more of the cleaners and disinfectants that you normally wouldn't do, maybe looking at other options that are more economical for you. So like steam cleaning is a good example of that, although it is not an EPA N-list product because it can't be considered a pesticide. You're not having to constantly buy chemicals. You're just using, you know, the chemical water to be able to keep using over and over again. So that might be an option. But I wanted to talk about what the lab is actually choosing to do. So we decided to go with electrolyzed water technology. We already had a relationship from testing and had done performance testing through our cleanersolutions.org database for information on performance. So we had a lot of the equipment on hand, and what was nice is we really only needed to buy the capsules, and the capsules are basically just more of a salt water vinegar mixture that is electrolyzed to create hypochlorous acid, which we had just talked about and is an N-list chemical. So, and what I like about it is once we make it, it keeps for 2 weeks. We're actually labeling our bottles too with the dates. So remember to label your bottles to ensure that you're keeping up to make sure that the products are actually working. And we're using it for our high touch surfaces. So for the benches, for the doorknobs or anything like that. And we're using safety goggles and gloves for that. And then we're also using a steam vapor system in-house for our floors. And the major hazards really are just the high temperature for the most part. I know some people in their homes, they don't use the safety glasses and gloves, but we're in a lab. We're gonna be wearing that. But these are kind of the options that we're utilizing so that we can reduce asthmagens. We're not having to expose ourselves, but we're still keeping our space clean and safe. I also suggest re-engineering your workstations, and this was something that the MA protocols actually mentioned as well. So putting visual distancing markers in at workstations, we're actually using painter's tape so we can visually see the 6 feet distance, and you know, placing throughout the facility as well. And we are also going on the assumption that people are not cleaning and disinfecting spaces when we utilize them. So it's a worst case scenario. We're assuming that when we're using a bathroom, for example, because we share with another company, I need to assume that those other people are not going to be on the same level as me and others at our facility for keeping up with that as well. So kind of thinking about that and having instructions and leaving, if you can find posters or create posters on how to properly use the cleaners and disinfectants to remind people and just having them readily available in those areas, I think it will help kind of cut down on a lot of miscommunication and also risk of certain areas being exposed to the virus. And we're also, you know, looking at areas where workers are congregating and, you know, you know, cutting back on using those areas like the break room areas and eating in our own offices, you know, cutting back so that deliveries aren't going fully into the facility. Maybe they're only going short distances. And by doing those sort of steps, you're not having to constantly clean and disinfect over and over a larger space. You're kind of more condensing down so you won't have to use as much and you're not going to be exposed to as much. And then just, you know, installing physical partitions when possible and maybe doing like one person at a time in certain areas like elevators, control rooms. If that's not feasible, you just kind of think about timing and needs and just kind of educating people on how to properly use that. And so I wanted to share what our space actually looks like. So this is our lab space, and you can kind of see workstations. So we've kind of already mapped out, and I highly suggest you do this too. If you have a map of your workspace, look at the 6 feet distances or even further and see what is feasible to be able to stretch out and maybe rotate out people on different days or in different areas. And that way, you know where the high touch areas are going to be. It will definitely help when you're doing your cleaning disinfection log. And so the main take-home messages that we kind of wanted to talk about, I'm sorry for rushing through, is clean first and then disinfect. You know, select products with the safer active ingredients that Jason had mentioned, and definitely please use the dwell times, the concentrations recommended. There's a reason why they're out there. It keeps you guys safe, and the SDS sheets are only as good as what you use, like based on the instructions on what was given. So if you use it outside of what the instructions were for that product, the SDS isn't going to be very helpful for you for those hazards, because that's what it was based around. And there's already limited information on the SDS safety data sheets. So you need to think about, you know, ensuring that you're using it properly and your workers are using it properly. Don't mix chemicals. You know, keep cleaners and disinfectants if feasible near workstations to minimize moving around. So that way people aren't going back and forth to grabbing stuff and kind of potentially contaminating certain areas that now you have to go back through and clean, disinfect. And just remember, your protocols are a living document. With us in the lab, for example, when we're going in, we're treating this as we're constantly evaluating ourselves to see what works and what doesn't work for our needs. If it becomes too strenuous, checking in with your workers to see how they're handling the new steps that they're having to incorporate into their daily lives, because we're already stressed out as it is when it comes to, you know, keeping ourselves safe. To add a whole other step, especially with chemicals that they may not be familiar with using, it's just good to check in with those people and seeing that your protocols work for your needs and your workers. And always feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about certain types of cleaners and disinfectants, because we'd be happy to try and see how we can help you guys fit with your, you know, your facility or your space. So that helped.
That's great. So Alicia and Jason, both of you, thank you so much for so much information. Also, thank you to everybody who has joined us here today. There's been some really terrific conversation happening in the chat box. We will be saving the chat box. We have recorded this webinar. We will be sharing the recording, the slides, some of the key resources that people have been sharing on the chat. All of that we will be posting on our website as soon as we can. So you know, we're at 11 o'clock and I understand many of you may need to go, but Jason and Alicia, if you're both willing, I'd like to suggest that we save maybe an additional 10 minutes here just to answer any questions that people may have. Does that work?
Works for me.
Yeah, great. So you are all able to unmute yourself. If you have a question, however, it would be best maybe if you could just raise your hand and then unmute yourself so that we can kind of keep control over this. So does anybody have anything that they'd like to share or questions they'd like to ask? Okay, Raleigh, I see your hand. Go ahead.
So we have a number of properties, but 2 of them properties for formerly homeless and at risk of homeless individuals. And across the properties, we have a variety of furniture, cloth furniture that we're a little concerned about, and then another property, leather furniture. And so the question has come up, how is it that you disinfect, how is it that you clean leather furniture, and how is it that you disinfect leather furniture without trashing the leather? And then, you know, second, what do you recommend for cloth furniture?
Thanks. Jason, Alicia, thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was I saw that in the request before the questions before the chat box, but that's with this virus that we're dealing with. They're saying that it's should be easily removed and destroyed by a basic cleaning product and process. So for the leather, if you have a particular leather product, a cleaning product that you've been using, chances are that you'll be able to break down the microorganism or the virus from the surface using that cleaning product. Now, I can't guarantee or verify that myself, because that's one of the things that we've been trying to get back into the lab to do, is conduct some of these best case scenarios for what if I have this and what if I do that. That's something that I don't have the specific answers for, other than finding something that you can use on leather and the fabrics until we actually get back into the lab and actually try it out ourselves. I can do some research offline, and Alicia will help with this as well, and we can follow up with you specifically. Right.
So I would suggest, Raleigh, that you send an email to info@turi.org, and we'll do our best to get you more information. And again, I recommend that to anyone on this call. If you have a question, you can just send an email to that address, and we'll get to it.
I actually was asked a similar question yesterday, not necessarily for couches, but for leather saddles and those types of things. So it's out there, people are asking about. So the more people that ask about it, the more likely we're going to dive into it and find some possible options for you to look at.
Thanks. And Liz Harriman, the Deputy Director from TURI, just said that she was on a webinar yesterday with EPA, and they have a study ongoing that is looking at the effectiveness of disinfectants on different surfaces. So that's great.
Hey, Pam, I also just wanted to address too. I know there was a concern about me bringing up the steam cleaning and how it isn't like an approved method. I just wanted to say that's more, I wanted to give an example of other options that you could research. You still need to do your homework to kind of see what's out there for information. That is just what the lab is currently using. But as Jason said, we're hoping to do testing soon on a surrogate virus, and maybe we'll have more information that can help you guys out sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Alicia. Any other questions? There's a bunch more questions and comments happening in the chat. But I wanted to see if anyone had a question they wanted to raise with Jason and Alicia right now.
This is Frank Altieri. Just a quick question. In the preview or the advertisement for this, there was an indication that a sample log, cleaning log would be provided, as well as a cleaning plan. And I did see some of that in the presentation, but I was really anticipating more of a template. Is something like that what you had anticipated or available to use?
Thanks, Frank, I am going to be putting something together that we have already shared a protocol with some other people who were kind of lost on what to do. And Jason, are you okay with me posting up?
Well,
I'll make some templates for you guys.
Yeah, our plan is to take what we've developed for our reopening of our lab and making it available to people to use as a template or a starting point to figure out what they could do. Obviously, what we're doing is going to be vastly different than most people, but the steps we went through and what we're looking at and what things we're going to do should help you be able to create your own. And if you're stuck and you still need help, let us know. And I'm sure that between the lab staff, we can come up with, help you with the plan you're working on.
Great. And this question and others that are coming up here are all really important for us, because one of the things that we're wanting to do and striving to do is to provide that kind of good information, again, with the lens of looking at safer alternatives for cleaning and disinfection. So that's great. And I think that we'll be able to address that on our website as well.
So there was a question that someone had asked about verifying the effectiveness in the real world as you're doing it. So I think I'm just trying to find out. It was from Rob
Jarouse, maybe?
No, it was John Ships.
Okay, John Ships.
Regardless of the method you employ for disinfecting, how do you verify efficacy? That's a great question. It's a challenging thing. And what EPA states is, you don't verify in the field, you verify that you're following the methods that were performed for that product. So that was where you would make sure you have to verify that you're using the right concentration, the right time, the right dwell time on that. They don't have a way for you to easily to go and say, all right, I just did this surface. Is it free of bacteria or microorganisms? You have to rely on the fact that they were tested under these conditions and they met and they killed what they needed to do. You just have to assume that it's doing what it's supposed to do under those conditions. It's not the answer I like, but it's the answer that they give. That may be something that we can brainstorm ways people could do this offline and make it available. But I mean, you'd have to do some kind of plate contacts. You basically plate the surface. You take your swab it, put it on the surface. You grow the organisms to see if there's anything there. The problem is that takes 2 to 3 days to get results. There are other ways you might be able to do it in real time, but it's not. The only way that they have to say yes is to verify you're doing it the way you're supposed to be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So a lot of good conversation still happening on the chat. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to pose directly to Alicia and Jason?
It's Dorothy Wigmore here.
Hi, Dorothy.
Hi, Pam. As the token Canadian on the call, probably. So I've seen Elise has been posting some points about the virus, how long it lasts on different surfaces and whatnot. And so I think that, well, just to back up a bit, my experience around this has been that people are freaking out a lot and they're cleaning everything, they're disinfecting everything when it doesn't need to be, when they're thinking that the food that comes into their house has to be, disinfected, that things have to be done my sister who lives alone is disinfecting her house, I don't know how many times a day. It doesn't make sense. So I'm thinking, it seems to me that in addition to sort of saying, here are the less toxic things to be using, we have to be talking about what really does need the disinfecting, because that's one way to reduce the use. And that then gets to the point of what does the virus live on and for how long? So how are you folks sort of dealing with that and trying to incorporate that into the message? Because I think the two have to go together. And it's not just saying, well, we'll use less nasty stuff, because if you're, using it a lot.
It's a great point about when and where and why. That's the questions you have to ask. I mean, if it's a certain area that people aren't going to have foot traffic in, does it necessarily need to be disinfecting 5 times a day? Probably not. I mean, I think some of the guidelines are requiring, when facilities open up, that you basically go through, clean and disinfect everything before you can open up, even if there was no chance of it being there. I think it's just part of the state protocols. I'll have to verify that, but from my quick reading, that's what it sounded like. But once you have re-entered, at least for our scenario, is nobody's been in our offices for over 3 months. The likelihood of it being there before that was very low. The likelihood that it's there now is non-existent, but we're still going to go through and follow the protocols, doing cleaning and disinfecting. From there, like Alicia was saying, it's a living document. We'll adjust as we go to determine what areas we're in contact with, where the flow of traffic is, how many people are going to be there. Has anybody have any exposure to COVID-19 people outside of where they are? So it's one of those things you have to tailor it to your specific needs and figure out what makes sense for where you are and what you're doing and who you are and what else is around. And it's not a specific answer, but it's the best practices. Yes, you don't probably have to disinfect the walls once you're back in there and doing stuff. The floors, maybe not so much, but depending on how people are sneezing and coughing and they're in there, and that's something to consider. But it's definitely see how it goes and see where you're at, but definitely trying to not do overkill is what we're trying to put out there as well as a message.
And I think also creating a checklist too is really helpful as well. Like Jason said, like once you figure out where the high traffic areas are and what you're constantly touching, those can maybe be the areas that you end up saying, okay, this is what the material's made out of. These are the recommendations based off of these cleaners and disinfectants for how long the virus could potentially live on there. But you don't have to overkill everything. Like we don't have to do a deep clean every single time or do the floors every single time, that we're going through there. I'm actually going in today, and I highly suggest anyone else who is helping with the protocols for their place, just do a daily, if it's just you in there, there's no one that you can get exposed to you know what I mean? Like, especially if no one has been in there. So you can actually maybe take the time to just kind of walk through maybe like a daily thing and see what things you commonly touch and go through, and just make note of that. And we were even talking too, when we were thinking about recommendations for other places, everybody, maybe you need to make a checklist for different types of positions for different jobs, because who is the ownership of who's actually cleaning and disinfecting? Because do you have staff that does it, that goes in and actually cleans your office space area, or are you doing it, and how often is that happening? And how can you also reduce those exposures to maybe those outside workers that going in? Like, for example, we decided we were coming in 3 days a week. Our trash levels would be reduced probably because of how many people are going in there. So you could think about that. And we decided that the cleaning staff that come in to collect trash won't come in until Mondays. So there would be a long weekend for them, for where no one would be in that area, that it reduces their potential for exposure. So definitely think about the flow of everything. And I like I said, this is a living document, and we'll definitely have more information as it goes forward and as we learn from experiences of what works and doesn't work. But I agree with you, Dorothy. I think people are overkilling it on what they're cleaning and disinfecting and how much they're doing it, and they really don't need to. Like, you know, our car, we use it once a week now, for example. I'm not going to clean it every day and disinfect it if, you know, I'm only using it once a week or something like that. That's just an example, but.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think this is all, we're all learning. This is an evolving situation. You know, just by looking at the chat, there's been a lot of back and forth about what we do and we don't know about the efficacy of different disinfectants. And just like with any science, particularly around what is